Right now, a room full of strangers somewhere is moving to the same beat, and it may be one of the most important things our ancestors ever did, and we can barely prove it ever happened. Maybe that was you last weekend. A song comes on, and before you decide anything, your foot is tapping, your head is nodding, your body has already joined in. It feels like nothing, a party trick, something we do once the real work is done. But it's one of the oldest things a human body can do. Older than farming, older than writing. And the current theory says it may be older than language itself. Because dance leaves no fossils. A stone tool survives for 1,000,000 years. A skull survives. A cooking fire leaves ash you can carbon date. But a dance is just a body moving through air, and then it's gone. There is no fossil of a movement. Think about how unfair that is. Bone flutes more than 40,000 years old have survived in the caves of Europe. So we can say with real confidence when humans started making music. But the dancing that almost certainly happened around those flutes left nothing behind at all. No archaeologist has ever dug up a celebration. So when we ask when humans started dancing, we are chasing a ghost. A behavior we are almost certain is ancient, with almost nothing solid to hold on to. To find it, researchers have had to get clever, and they look in two very different places, what our closest living relatives still do today, and the marks we left behind on stone. Start with the relatives. In 2019, at Kyoto University's Primate Research Institute, Yuko Hattori and Masaki Tomonaga ran a deceptively simple experiment and published it in the journal PNAS. They played piano sounds to chimpanzees, not trained routines, not food rewards, just sound. And the chimps began to move. They swayed rhythmically. They bobbed. They tapped. Some of them almost swaggered in time. The researchers noticed that the swaying tracked the tempo of the sound, and that the chimps moved most while standing upright, on two legs, the very posture that would one day free our own ancestors to move. Males responded more than females, and that detail lines up with something field researchers had noticed for decades. Wild male chimps sometimes break into rhythmic, stamping displays when a storm rolls in, a behavior they nicknamed the rain dance. Now, you have to be careful here. Other scientists pushed back hard on what this really means, and the debate is genuinely open. But Hattori and Tomonaga argued that the raw ingredient of dance, the impulse to move your body to a beat, may reach all the way back to the common ancestor we share with chimpanzees, roughly 6 million years ago. If they're right, the seed of dance is older than our entire species. But an impulse isn't a dance, so why would evolution wire a body to do this at all? Here the story turns from apes to chemistry. At the University of Oxford, a team including Bronwyn Tarr, Emma Cohen, and Robin Dunbar went looking for what actually happens inside us when we move together. In a 2015 study in the journal Biology Letters, they worked with 264 teenagers on Marajo Island in Brazil. They split them into small groups and had them move in different ways. Some in tight synchrony, some out of step, some working hard, some barely exerting at all. Then they measured each person's pain threshold, which is a reliable proxy for endorphins, the brain's own opioids. The results were clean. Moving in synchrony raised the pain threshold. Physical exertion raised it too, and both, independently, made people feel closer to the group they had just moved with. Dance was quietly dosing them on their own endorphins and gluing them to each other while it did it. In a later experiment, the same team nicknamed the silent disco, they showed that synchrony alone could pull strangers together, even when the dancers moved to music playing only in their own headphones, silent to everyone watching. The Oxford group has a name for the feeling behind this: self-other merging. When you move in perfect time with other people, the boundary between you and them starts to soften. Your brain begins to file them under the same heading as you. And that points to something far bigger than a good night out. Robin Dunbar is famous for the idea that there is a natural ceiling on how many relationships a brain like ours can genuinely track, somewhere around 150 people. Other primates hold their groups together by grooming, picking through each other's fur one-on-one, but you simply cannot groom 150 individuals. There aren't enough hours in the day. For most of human history, our ancestors lived in groups too large for that kind of slow, private bonding. Dancing may have been the workaround, a way to bond dozens of people at once, in minutes, through nothing but shared motion. Sit with what that means. That's not entertainment. That's social technology. a machine for manufacturing a tribe. And here's something you can feel in your own skull. In 2008, in Scientific American, the neuroscientists Stephen Brown and Lawrence Parsons described what happened when they slid dancers into a brain scanner. Keeping time with a beat lit up the cerebellum, an ancient structure at the base of the brain, and specific circuits seemed devoted to locking body movement onto an outside rhythm. They call it entrainment. In other words, staying in step with other people isn't something we manage in spite of our biology. We appear to have dedicated hardware for it, built right in. Brown has gone further and suggested that this group entrainment, many bodies moving as one, may be exactly where our sense of rhythm came from in the first place. So the biology runs deep. Now let's go looking for the evidence in stone, and this is where it finally gets concrete. In central India, at the Bhimbetka rock shelters in Madhya Pradesh, there are more than 700 shelters, and around 400 of them carry prehistoric paintings. Among the animals and the hunts, there are people with linked arms and bent knees, caught mid-movement. One famous figure holding a staff was nicknamed the Nataraj by the archaeologist V.S. Wakankar, after the dancing form of the Hindu god Shiva. The oldest paintings here are dated to roughly 10,000 years ago, in the Mesolithic, though humans sheltered under these rocks for far, far longer. And the dancing figures never really stop. They run right up through the later layers, past hunters, past horsemen, as if generation after generation looked at the same wall and added themselves to the same dance. These are some of the earliest surviving pictures of humans doing the exact thing we still do. But this is where the story turns eerie, because the same image keeps surfacing on different continents, made by people who could never have met. On Mount Pellegrino, near Palermo on the island of Sicily, there's a cave called the Grotta della Daura. Carved into its wall, dated to around 11,000 years ago, is a ring of human figures. They surround two central figures whose bodies are bent, arms and legs positioned in a way that scholars have argued can only be movement. In a 2019 paper in the journal Open Archaeology, titled The Addaura Cave, Dance and Rite in Mesolithic Sicily, the researcher Paola Budano read the scene as exactly what it looks like. A group locked in a ritual dance, a circle of dancers frozen in rock for 11,000 years. And a circle is still how we dance today, at weddings, around fires, in almost every culture that has ever formed one. Then there is the Sahara, which, if you go back far enough, was not a desert at all. During what scientists call the Green Sahara, it was grassland and lakes and moving herds. On the rock walls of Tassili N'Ajjer in Algeria, some of the art reaches back around 12,000 years, and one phase in particular, the Roundhead period, very roughly 9 to 7,000 years ago, is full of tall, floating figures with smooth, featureless round heads. Many of them appear to be dancing, arms lifted, bodies streaming upward, some wearing horns and flowing cloth. The common reading is ceremony, trance, something we would recognize as shamanic. We can't prove what these people believed, but we can see, plainly, that they gathered, and they moved, and they thought it was worth carving into a cliff so that it would outlast them by 10,000 years. And here's the thing about all these painted dancers. They may never have actually stopped. In the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa, the San people still perform what anthropologists call the trance dance, or the healing dance, and some scholars believe it may be one of the oldest continuously practiced rituals on the planet. The women sit in a tight circle around the fire, clapping interlocking rhythms and singing. The men dance around them, hour after hour, stamping a ring into the sand, rattles wrapped around their legs, until deep into the night something shifts. The anthropologist Richard Katz, who documented these dances in the 1960s, described healers entering a trance state, the San call Kia, driven by what they describe as a boiling energy rising up the spine, in which they believe they can pull sickness out of the sick. No instruments beyond the human body, no stage, just rhythm and motion, and a group holding one another through the dark. And it is exactly what you'd expect if the Oxford scientists are right, that moving together for hours floods the body with its own opioids and dissolves the space between people. When researchers look at the trance-like postures painted onto rock walls across southern Africa, some of them many thousands of years old, they see echoes of the very same dance. We can't prove the thread is unbroken, but if it is, a version of that fireside healing dance has been running, night after night, For longer than farming, longer than writing, longer than almost anything else we do. And this is the part almost nobody talks about. One of the oldest monuments on Earth may have been built, in part, to dance around. At Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, roughly 11,000 years old, the archaeologist Klaus Schmidt uncovered enormous T-shaped stone pillars, some carved with arms folding over belts, as if the stones themselves were bodies. Some of them stand over 5 meters tall and weigh many tons, hauled upright without wheels, without draft animals, without a scrap of metal. And here's the thing. This place was raised before farming, before pottery, before cities, by hunter-gatherers using flint tools. Schmidt argued it was a gathering site, where scattered bands walked in from across the region for great feasts, probably washed down with some of the earliest beer humans ever brewed, and, the current theory holds, almost certainly dancing. Picture that. Before our species had settled down, before anyone had planted a single field, people were already walking for days just to come together and move as one. So here's the reframe. We tend to assume dance is a byproduct, decoration, leisure, a bit of fun that humans invented once the serious business of survival was handled. The evidence keeps pointing in the opposite direction. The synchronized, endorphin-flooded, tightly bonded group was not the reward for building a society. It may have been the very thing that made a society possible in the first place. Dance isn't the cherry on top of human cooperation. It looks more like part of the foundation, and it may go even deeper. The cognitive scientist Merlin Donald has argued that long before we had words, our ancestors communicated through mime, through the whole moving body, and that this bodily stage came before speech. If that idea is right, then dance is not some distant cousin of art and language. It may be one of their ancestors. That's not a hobby. That's a rough first draft of everything we would later learn to say out loud. There's a modern echo of this that makes the whole idea click. The historian William McNeill felt it himself as a young soldier, drilling in the army, marching in step for hours under the Texas sun. He expected to be bored out of his mind. Instead, he described a strange, welling euphoria, a sense of being swollen larger than life, his own edges dissolving into the men moving around him. Decades later, in a book called Keeping Together in Time, he gave the feeling a name, muscular bonding, and argued that moving together in rhythm has been quietly welding human communities together for as long as there have been communities. Armies march, congregations sway, whole stadiums chant and jump as one. It is the same ancient machinery that Göbekli Tepe was built around, just running now in a uniform instead of a loincloth. Let's put the whole thing back in order. Around 6 million years ago, the impulse to move to a beat may already be flickering in an ape swaying at the first sound of rain. By 11,000 years ago, people are carving a ring of dancers into a cave in Sicily and raising carved stone pillars in Turkey. By 10,000 years ago, they are painting dancers onto rock walls in India and across a Sahara that was still green. In the Kalahari, the sand may have been dancing the very same healing dance the entire time, right up to tonight. And in all the long, unfossilized dark between then and now sit every wedding, every festival, every crowded concert, and every kitchen at midnight, including yours. So the next time the beat drops and your body starts to move before your mind gives it permission, notice that reflex. It is not new, and it is not yours alone. That pull is quite possibly older than farming, older than writing, older than the first full sentence any human ever spoke, and maybe, just maybe, older than our species itself. When you dance, you are not just letting off steam. You are running one of the oldest programs the human animal has ever carried. A piece of code for turning a crowd of strangers into something that feels, for a few minutes, like a single body. All the research is linked in the description.